go ahead and get started. Okay, so that's streaming. Perfect. Okay, let's take a look at our schedule here. So we have a regular class next week. I'd imagine there might be a couple people missing due to Thanksgiving because some people will go out of town for the whole week. But next week is going to be the review lecture. So today's going to be the very last day of regular lecture. Everyone's been doing pretty good. Most people made it through the class, so that's good. But don't drop off now because you still have, 30 points out there because you have your final exam, which is 20 points, and then this last assignment, which is 10 points. So if you just decide, I'm doing good so far, I'm just gonna, these last couple of weeks I don't feel like doing anything. Don't forget that, you can still get a lot of points out there. So today we're gonna do a little bit of new material. We're gonna talk about how to use WordPress with Bootstrap. So last week so 2 weeks ago we started WordPress. WordPress, I think most people find the base WordPress system pretty simple to use, correct? Anybody had any trouble with it? Okay, so it's pretty straightforward to use. And then we talked about how most of the power from WordPress is through these various themes. And then we used kind of an older generic theme. And then last week we made our own theme, but it was just using base HTML, very simplistic stuff. And a few weeks ago we started Bootstrap, and then now today we bring it all together. We make a theme that uses Bootstrap. Now, one of the things that we ran into was, remember, our menu system. It only could handle flat menus. It couldn't handle like the drop-down sub-menus and things like that. And so we'll handle all of that today. So that's essentially what we're doing today. Next week we're going to do a review, which is essentially, to be perfectly honest, it's probably just going to be today's lecture again, but maybe a little bit faster, just so you're really solid, because essentially your final exam, I'll let you know this ahead of time, is I'm going to give you a page. I'm going to say, turn this page into a WordPress theme. But obviously you're going to be under much tighter time constraints, and you're going to have all your notes and everything in order, because you're going to have to do it in about an hour. So changes things a little bit when you have to do the equivalent of the whole homework assignment in about an hour. Next week, if we do have time left over, maybe I'll find something extra to do. We had talked about transitions, animation. Maybe I'll do something on that. Maybe I'll talk about, there are these things called PWAs, progressive web apps, where it makes it so that you can write a web app that actually works on your phone. Like you can actually have it show up as an icon on your phone. It's really not that tough to convert it into a PWA, especially if you're using a framework that's already mobile ready, like Bootstrap. So maybe we'll do that, but we'll see how much time is left over next class. And then that takes us to the final exam, which will be on the 3rd. Now, as far as due dates that are still out there, so assignment number 7 is graded, which might have seemed odd that I graded it out of order. I just didn't get to assignment number 6 yet. The reason I graded assignment number 7 is that way you can get started on assignment number 8. Because they both use WordPress, and you only get your one WordPress login. It's not like I give you separate WordPress for each assignment. So assignment number 7 is graded, so that means that you can start to work on assignment number 8, which requires you to change out a theme and do a couple of other things. So and then usually this time of year, what I'll do is I'll do some sort of extension that says, hey, if you missed an assignment, if you've completed all your other assignments and you just missed one assignment or did very poorly on it, like you got like a D or an F on it or something like that, what I'll usually do is let you resubmit that assignment, but you have to send me an email stating which assignment you'd like to use, and it has to be turned in within like a certain period of time. So I'll send out an official announcement about that today. But if anybody in here missed an assignment, the rule for this is for this to work, you have to have done all your other assignments. Because I've had people try to do this in the past where they try to do the whole class in like a week, and then they just turn in really poor work. They like, a whole semester's worth of very low quality work. That's why I only give you one. It's like people make mistakes, stuff happens. Like you just worked a couple late nights in a row and you just didn't have the energy to do your assignment. I understand that. So if you just missed one single assignment, I'm going to extend that to you. But I'll put out something official today, so just watch out for the announcement, okay? I think that's it before we get started. Any questions? Okay, so what I did is I gave you some starter code here. So if you go under class examples, let me just make sure that this is still recording. It's picking everything up. Test, test, test. Okay, perfect. Sometimes what will happen is in some of these classrooms, the dropped frame rate will be at like 50%. So that's why I'm always obsessively checking this. It depends the classroom and the computer and everything. Okay, and then so you see that there is some starter code for today. So let's go ahead and download that. And what I would probably suggest is taking that starter code, unzipping it or uncompressing it, and then cut that code and then move it over to wherever you've been doing your other code. So like, for example, I keep a CGS4828 on my desktop. Maybe you can just paste that starter code in there. So under class examples, all the way at the bottom we had starter code. So I clicked that to download it, and then it downloaded, and then I unzipped it, and then I copied it, and then you know how normally we have like our CGS4828 folder, like some people might keep it on their flash drive. I keep it on my desktop. All I did was just paste it in right in there. In Mac, I think if you just click it once, it automatically unzips. Hold on, I can help. We're not in a huge hurry today. Yeah, so grab this one right here, and then kind of copy that one works. Now if you copy one more, and then wherever you. And then that's for a specific date, and I have to go back a level. That's fine. As long as you know how to find it, that's important. Okay. So that's going to be our starter. Let's go ahead and open up brackets. And you know how you can click this and open folder and point to it? Let's do that. We haven't done that in a couple of weeks, but make sure you know how to remember to do that. Just open up brackets, and then there should be a little, I don't know what this would be, kind of like a button sort of thing. We click this and go to open folder. And then point it to wherever you just, so in my case, I put it in my CGS4828. So just find this 11/19/2019 starter code. And then select that folder, and you should see a bunch of files pop up here. Okay, so that's step one. Get brackets all set up. And then step two is make sure that you can still log into your WordPress account. So it's irscstudentweb.org/tilde and then your student number. So don't use the Z in all ones. That's my specific user that I set up for this. Put in your own student number. And don't forget it's case sensitive, so it's a capital first letter. And then you may have to add /WordPress 2 afterwards. Some of you, if you don't have, some of you took CGS1821 with me, and so you probably have stuff already in there. So if you do /WordPress 2 afterwards, that should take you to WordPress. Now this is my site because I tested the theme that we're going to create today. I tested it earlier. To get to the admin part, what do I add afterwards? It's just one word. It's very simple. I always do WP admin, but I'm curious if just admin works. No, it doesn't. Okay, so it's WP -admin. I guess that's technically 2 words, right? I don't know if WP is a word. Either way. So you do /WP admin. So again, it's going to be ircstudentweb.org. The first day that we created it, all we had is the IP address. That's why it's redirecting back here. You can just ignore that. Then a tilde, and then your student number, /WordPress 2, /WP admin. Ignore all this other stuff. This is automatically appended. So just up to this part right here. Just this. Okay, is everyone there? Thumbs up if you're there. So get rid of the stuff after the slash. Everything so far is good. And then type in WordPress and the number 2. And then /WP -. And then our username and password we created, everyone should be IRSC. So go ahead and log in with that. Okay, so everyone should be all set up at this point. I'm going to go kind of slow today because we have enough time. I know sometimes I have to rush through things and people fall behind. Okay, so everyone's logged into WordPress. You got brackets all set up. Everything's ready to go. Okay, so I put this little file in here called guide.txt. If you remember, the goal wasn't to learn how to program PHP. It was just to, show you which PHP code to be able to copy and paste and to maybe get a basic understanding of how it works. That way, if you want to move something from like the top of the page to the bottom of the page, you knew which code did that. Okay, so that's really the goal. The goal isn't for you to understand every bit of this code. So if you don't quite understand everything, that's perfectly okay.
Those index PHP?
So this is under guide.txt. So I have a index.html page in there. And so I usually recommend, this is just a random Bootstrap page. It's really nothing, it's not that interesting. I guess I can open it up in a browser just so we can see what it is. Nothing terribly interesting, just a page, it's got some content. So the very first thing that we want to do is take this and split it up into a header and footer. Remember, because we have the header, footer, and then this little area right here where it says main content goes here. That's where WordPress automatically brings in that content that we had from before. So let's start with that. So we take everything from container. Just going back to some Bootstrap. What does container do? Does anybody remember? Why do you think I want to put my main content inside of that container class?
So content's not everywhere.
Yeah, sort of. So the word I'm looking for, it starts with an R. It's responsive. Yeah, remember how we used to have to do, I know it seems like forever ago, but remember we used to have to do media queries manually?
Yeah.
That's what container does for us. So this is nice because now our content inside of our page, it shrinks it automatically. It takes care of everything for us, so it's great. So we do want to include that all the way up to the top, including the doc type HTML, everything. All of that is going to go inside of our header. That's fine. We don't need PHP.
I'm sorry, I just don't want to be lost for the whole class.
Okay, so you found that file called index.html.
Right, in the class WP Bootstraps, am I supposed to copy and paste that?
No. So don't. The only files we're worried about right now are only things we should have open are the guide, which has the directions.
Okay.
So that's all this is, just some copy and paste code directions.
So I can copy and paste.
Well, we're not copying and pasting just yet. So you're going to have this open and then index.html.
Okay.
And then so what we want to do is scroll down to index.html to where you see like container and highlight that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
It's kind of near the bottom of the page.
I see the div, but I don't see where it says main content here.
Did you download the...
Lecture, I guess. I have no idea. This is not what you have. So I don't know.
last week's stuff open. So click here, we're getting started, and go to open folder. And then remember that where you set it up earlier? Yeah, so click desktop. And then go to, yeah, and then expand that. Nope, click here. Click there so it expands it, and then now there's all your stuff. So go to index.html. Yeah, and then scroll down to where. Okay, so we highlight from here all the way to the top. We want the whole thing. And that's all going to go inside of header.php. Remember, the whole reason of creating the index.html first is because what you end up with is a bunch of what are called partial pages. And it makes it very difficult. Because like right now, this header.php, it's got an opening div that closes in another file. So it should be pretty obvious why this would be difficult to actually program with, because like if you're trying to like match divs and stuff like that between files, it gets kind of tough. I did see recently somebody created a tool, maybe I'll try it out next semester, where it actually does this part automatically for you. I'm thinking that maybe you just put in like some special comments or something and it knows how to split the file up automatically from there, but I didn't want to experiment with that this late in the semester with a tool that I've never tried. So but if anybody's interested, like if you move on and you start doing this outside of class, it might be something worth looking into. But that's why we create the index.html first, because then we just take that and then split it up. So the second part is if we go back to index.html and then everything after the content, which is not much, it's just the div and this. That's going to go inside of footer.php.
It says main content here on the index.html. We're supposed to copy and paste that in.
No, so what'll happen here is we don't actually care about this.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
And then so what'll happen is everything between header and footer, and that actually brings us to the next part, is so if we go back to our guide, it says, okay, in index.php, paste this code. So from here to here, and then where it used to say main content goes here, lines 5 through 9, that's what actually, so it gets the header, it gets the footer, And then all that stuff in the middle, this is code that it actually reaches into the database and grabs the content of the page. So let's copy that. And we're looking for index.php. So we copied from line 3 to 12. And then paste that into index.php. And I'm just going to make sure I do a file save all, make sure everything's saved because we're working with a lot of files. Since we have the time, I'll go over this one more time. How many people remember functions from your JavaScript class? Show hands. A couple people? A little bit? You don't? How many people remember the word function from your other class? But so you did go over them, right? You did go over functions? Okay. Long story short, the idea of a function is it's just reusable piece of code. Okay? So what a function does is, I call this function called getHeader, and it does a bunch of stuff in the background. What the stuff in the background is, remember we created a file called header.php? It actually grabs all that and then puts it there for you. So imagine almost like a search and replace. And remember how we tell PHP code? Is that we have this PHP at the beginning. So this is not regular HTML code. The stuff from the question mark to question mark, this is PHP code right here. That's why we have this special extension .php. So it takes all that code from the header, .php. Same thing here. And then remember we had that little stuff that said content goes here? This is what happens here. And so this is written in a generic way. That's why it's a little bit the code's a little bit complicated for what it does. This version should work for blog pages just as well as regular pages. And that's why we're testing things here, like to see if there are posts. And then a function like the post actually gets the post. Okay, but our pages aren't going to have any posts, so this is actually going to return nothing. Then what do you think this function right here does, the title? What do you think that returns? The title, yeah. So you know how on every page we had to create a title? That's what this does. So right now it's inside of an H1. What if I decided I didn't want my title inside of an H1? What would I have to do? Just change the H1 to whatever I wanted it to be. If I wanted to make it a part of a class. So I want you to understand this code. I don't want you to think of it as just flat out copy and paste and be done. And then now same thing here for the content. Now if I remember correctly, I don't think this, I reused this code from the spring. And I don't remember, one of the tough things is when you're making these, it's like, what does the content actually return? I need to see this. Like, does it return a bunch of paragraphs? Does it return a bunch of loose text? What does it return? So we're going to actually go back later and look at the finished page. But let's just leave it inside of a paragraph for now. And then if something bad happened, we just have an error that says, hey, no posts match your, in our case, it's not going to be posts, it's going to be pages. So we could change that, but I wrote this code years ago. This code, like, it's probably like 3 or 4 years old at this point. So you can change it if you want. I'm not going to touch it. So that's our index. So right now when our page loads, the first thing that loads is our index. And then that index grabs the header, grabs the footer, and then it hits the database and it grabs all those pages. Remember how content management systems work. There's not a oil changes.html page out there. Where's that oil changes content stored? It's actually stored inside of a database. And that's why these content management systems can be a little bit tricky to work with, is because most of the content is stored inside of a database, and every time you hit a page, it actually reaches into the database and grabs a little chunk of HTML. And that's what happens, is that it grabs a little chunk of HTML here and another chunk of HTML here, and then maybe the navigation from here, and then it puts it all together in one final page, which is a very complicated system. But you get a bunch of things for free by using WordPress or a content management system. You get plugins, you get all kinds of free things. You get authentication. So it becomes worthwhile versus a bunch of static HTML pages can get a little bit tricky, but anyway, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more next class. So going back to our guide, now we got to get into the details, okay? So if you remember, there was a special file called style.css, and this contains a bunch of metadata. It's basically this is a CSS comment. That's why it's all grayed out. And it has a bunch of key value pairs. So the name of our theme, the author, the description, all this other stuff. And it's key value. So the key would be theme name. This would be the value. Notice that I appended v2 to everything, because what will happen is if you have a theme with the exact same name, then it'll clash and it'll cause problems. And so last week we did version 1 of this theme. And so I just added v2 to everything to make it so that last week was v1, this week will be v2, next week, so our review will be version 3, and your final exam will be v4. So it keeps them all separate, so you can kind of version them in case you need to go back to one. So, but now this isn't included automatically. We have to go back to our page and actually include it somehow. So if we go back to guide, it tells you how to do this. So it says inside of header.php, take this whole line of code right here, line number 15, copy it, and then put it anywhere in the head section. So again, I copied line number 15, and then in header.php, we can put it pretty much anywhere. Not header, head. So, I'm sorry. So in header.php, inside of the head section, I got to keep track of all my names here. We can put it pretty much everywhere. Tongue twisters today. So inside of header.php, put it inside of the head section. And so you can see here I put it between there. And then that'll bring in, it calls a PHP function that grabs the style sheet. So it'll grab that CSS, that style.css for us. That has all the theme info. That way when we try to install our theme, everything's great. Okay, now we go back to our guide. In this case, we're not using any images. Last week we had some images. This week we don't really have to worry about that, but I left that just in case you needed it. Okay, so now we get into kind of an interesting thing. If you remember last week, our navigation couldn't handle submenus. Now somebody created a nice little Bootstrap plugin. Should be WordPress Bootstrap. I think it's called Navwalker. Yeah. And so it has all kinds of directions on how to use it and everything. I'm going to give you kind of the simplified version. So we have to have this plugin. I already downloaded it for you. So you can see right here, class WP Bootstrap Navwalker. And this is very complicated code. I wouldn't expect you to understand it, but somebody went to the effort to write all this code for us so we don't have to. And then now, to use it, all we have to do is take this code right here, which you should recognize as, let's copy and paste it. That way it's syntax highlighted. So from nav to nav. So take this whole thing, and then we go to header.php, and then we take our old static navigation, with just a bunch of links, and we replace it. So we're getting rid of our navigation inside of header.php, which was a hard-coded navigation, which isn't great because it's not a dynamically created menu. And we paste in this code. So you should recognize this code as being kind of similar. This is just a Bootstrap navigation. If this isn't familiar, go back to W3 Schools and just kind of review the Bootstrap navigation in the nav bar and how it works. And everything looks normal, except for all of a sudden, we've got some PHP code. And what this PHP code does is that plugin, it actually, there's a function here and that actually calls all that code that we just saw earlier, and it dynamically builds the proper menu system. It's pretty cool. It's got a bunch of options here. But for a simple menu, you actually don't have to really change any of it. So we're just going to accept all the defaults. So there's a function called WP nav menu. Now one of the things, so this is going to go ahead and build out the menu. If you wanted to make adjustments, you could. You'd just go to, like, instead of navbar light, you could change it to navbar dark and so on. And, you know, the normal stuff that we talked about when we talked about navbars. So if we go back to the guide, so that's just Bootstrap navigation plus this plugin which generates all the dynamic menu items for us. We have to do one more thing, and I didn't really talk about this last week, but every time you install a new new WordPress theme, it calls this special file here, functions.php. And it causes certain things to get registered. So just including that plugin isn't enough. We have to actually register it, and that's what this code does. And so let's copy and paste this. So we're going to copy this from question mark to question mark, just like this. And again, you don't have to understand the details of it. You just have to understand that this registers the plugin. Not really plugin. It just registers the code. I keep on saying the word plugin, but it's plugin has a special meaning inside of WordPress, so I shouldn't use that term. But essentially, it's like outside code that we're trying to use. And this code in particular relates to menus. So let's go ahead and copy this. And then we're going to paste this inside of, there should be a file called functions.php. And we paste that in there. Now, once we've imported this code right here, we have to actually associate it with a theme. So our theme is called IRC Theme V2. So next week, when we're doing our review, what do I have to change this to? It's not going to be IRC Theme V2. It's going to be V3, exactly. So just be mindful of that if we try to use the same code next week, that wouldn't work. So this has to match what you put back in your style.css. Okay, so we're getting there. We split our page, so we took our index.html, we split it into a header and footer. Then we took our index.php code, put it in there. We took our style.css, made sure that was good, and then imported that into the header.php. That way it can read all the version info and the author and all that stuff. Then we took our old static navigation and we brought in our dynamic navigation using this Bootstrap NavWalker PHP code that we downloaded. Then we had to register that code and register the menu. So that's where we're at right now. And I think that's it. Let's make sure we did everything here. So we split it up in header and footer. We have our index.php. We included this. We don't have images. We registered the code inside of functions.php. And we brought in the header.php code. So we should actually be in good shape to go ahead and zip this up and upload it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go here. And on Mac, you just right-click and compress or zip or whatever they call it. On Windows, I have to send to zipped folder. And obviously, you might want to rename it now that it's finished. You maybe want to call it, the date finished or something like that, but it doesn't really matter too much. And then now we head over to our admin page inside of WordPress. And then we go over to themes, so appearance and then themes. And give me a second. By the way, if you ever need to delete a theme, you have to activate another theme. So I activated last week's theme because I need to delete it because I was testing earlier. And then, so what'll happen is, like, if you try to delete an active theme, there's going to be no delete button. So what you have to do is you have to set another theme as active, and then when you go in, you can delete it. And again, that's why. Does it exist? Huh. It's weird. Okay. Let me click this one more time here. That is a little strange that it's saying that doesn't exist. Hold on. Let me try to activate it and then delete it. Otherwise, hopefully it'll just override it. No, okay. I'm hoping it'll just override it. Okay, so under themes, I add new, and then upload. And then I put it my CGS4828. And then find that zip file. So I found mine here. Wherever you stored it, just go ahead and find it. And if everything went well, magically we'll get no errors. Okay. So it's like a 50-50 shot if it has errors. So this time we everything installed correctly, everything's great. We can go ahead and activate it. And then visit the site in a new tab. And there's our menu. It's got the drop down, everything's great. So we've got our home page, our services. I click that, it goes to tire rotation. It brings in our image. Everything's awesome. Now, a couple quick things here. I want to view the source because remember earlier I didn't quite know what HTML it would generate. So let me view the page source and let me see what HTML it actually generated. So I've got my container class and then my H1 tire rotation here. And then I've got an opening paragraph and then a separator. And then another opening paragraph. That's probably not the best thing I can do here. You're really not supposed to put paragraphs inside of paragraphs. So let's go ahead and fix that. So one option would be to fix it and then re-upload it. But if you're just making basic changes, you can actually go in and there's a theme editor. So we can click theme editor. And then we need to go to, I think it was under index.php. And then right here where it says the content, maybe change that from a paragraph to a div. So it's still in some sort of container. It's just not a paragraph. You can put paragraphs inside of divs, but it doesn't really make sense to put paragraphs inside of paragraphs. So again, I went to appearance, theme editor, and it edits the active theme. Then I went to index.php, and then where it says PHP the content, I changed that from a paragraph to a div. And just from looking at the code here, it's very difficult to tell what code it'll generate. So oftentimes you'll have to actually either go to the API documentation, which can be tough to read for some people, or just view the source. To me, that's sometimes just an easier way to do things. And then we update, and then now let's view that source again. So I'm going to go over here and reload the page. Then now view page source. And now this time, notice I've got a div instead of the paragraph. And that makes a little bit more sense. or maybe I could have even called it section. Maybe section would have been better, but either way, you get the idea. So you can do very, very basic edits inside of here. I wouldn't do much past this because it can get a little bit difficult to keep track of everything. But if you've made a minor mistake like we did, like we had paragraphs inside of paragraphs, that works out pretty well. Okay, so is everyone good so far? Like you've got this, like you've got your navigation menu works from your assignment.
Mine says theme installation failed.
Okay. Let me help you after class because that probably means that there was like a file that was off or something. So we'll have to go through all your files one at a time.
CSS style sheet.
Okay. So let's do one more thing. Our home page right now is not that interesting. If you remember, we created a home page. I want to say it was on 1029. So I'm going to go ahead and extract the code from 1029. You can open it with whatever, Notepad, brackets, whatever. I guess I'll just temporarily do Notepad++. Because now if you remember, we did a thing where we had our container, but then we had our grid. Do you remember that? So in this case, we had our different cards. And it's very popular on a home front page to maybe have something like this with some cards. Because we're not writing a super advanced theme, you can actually automate this if you know PHP well enough. In this code, I'm not really expecting anybody in here to know PHP, so we're going to cheat a little bit. And let's go ahead and take the code from that example from that day. And we don't want the container, we just want up to row. So I'll go through that slow one more time. Is that we went to the class examples from 1029, downloaded that, extracted it, then open it in whatever. You can open it in brackets, whatever text editor, anything. And then we had some code that said div class equals row. So grab just the row. We don't want the container. The container's too much because we already have a container. We just want this stuff that says row and then make sure that it matches up. Copy this. Now, remember on your last week assignment, I had you add some custom HTML. We can actually take this HTML in here and add it to our home page so that we can kind of have a grid system for our home page. Now, again, if you're good with PHP, you can kind of automate this a little bit, but ours is going to be hard-coded, which is fine for now. I just want to kind of... What's that? Oops. Let me open it in brackets. Hold on. So this part that says row. So just div class equals row from here to here. Sometimes it's easier to copy from the bottom. So we go from here all the way up to where it says div class equals row. Did you find it?
Yeah.
Okay. We copy that. And then now we're going to find under our pages, all pages. I think I called mine home. Yeah. And we can go to edit. And they're always changing this on me, so it might take a second for me to remember how to do this. Okay. So if we want to replace this right here, I think we can... Where was it? So I think I have to click here and then edit as HTML. Let's see if this works. So it should be in HTML mode, I think. Okay, so custom HTML. Perfect, okay. Let me go through that process one more time. So So I go to my home page, I go to edit. I've made this more difficult than it needs to be, I think. So what I can do here is I can click this and say edit as HTML, wipe out the whole thing. And then actually even shorter, there should be a button right here that says add custom HTML. And then that puts us into HTML mode. And then I should just be able to paste in that code as is. Now all these class names work because when we import Bootstrap, it's like available globally. So all these like names like card and call MD4 and so on, these all work because we've imported Bootstrap. And the preview may or may not work. Let's see. Didn't work that great because it's in like kind of like a frame or something like that, but let's see how it actually looks on our page. So let's go ahead and click update. And then now we should be able to refresh our home page. And look at that. Now, so our home page has these cards, and you can put in your own images from there. But then our other pages work like normal. So we still have our oil changes and tire rotation, but our home page now is set up for a responsive card system on a grid. And it's got the collapsing navigation. Everything works. Okay. So this is kind of like the final. This is all your classes all together to where you could take this. Now this is a very basic page, but you wouldn't have to really have very many new techniques. It would just be filling out content. Does that make sense? So at this point in the course, in your degree, you have all the techniques, you know everything. Now it would just be taking the time to actually make a page and fill in the content. But you get the basic idea, okay? So pretty cool thing now that like you don't, for those of you that have worked with WordPress before, now you're not dependent on other people's themes. You can make your own theme. And if you get good at it, what you can do is make a theme for one business, and then the next business kind of reuse a lot of that, and then just customize their color and some basic, change their pages and basic theming, but the actual structure you can many times keep the same. Okay. So I think that's it for today. We did kind of a lot. Any questions on anything? If anybody's didn't work, just stick around. We have about 15 minutes. I can help you. But I think that's pretty much it. And that's essentially going to be your final exam, is that I'm going to give you a static page, static Bootstrap page, and then you're going to have to go through that process. And your exam you'll have realistically probably about an hour. Once we get going, directions, all that sort of stuff, you'll have a little bit over an hour. Okay. So now let's go to your assignment. And your assignment is to basically take that page that we just created and do something more interesting with it than what we've just done. So fill it out, make it an actual complete web page. Since this is your starting point, if you just if you just handle these basic requirements, that might get you maybe like a B or a C, depending on how high quality it is. To get an A, you got to really put some effort into it. And to your credit, a few people actually did put, quite a few people on your WordPress assignment. I saw you did go to a lot of effort filling out content. So for those of you that actually put in a lot of effort for your last WordPress assignment, number 8 should be a piece of cake because you've already done most of the work. So congratulations for those of you on assignment number 7 that really put in some effort. For those of you who just kind of did the bare minimum for assignment number 7, you got a little bit more work to do for assignment number 8. The idea for 8 is that this is like, if you're running a small business, create a page that you'd be proud to represent your business. Okay.
You still want the 2013?
No. So you're going to be making your own theme. So that's kind of out the door now.
All right.
But what's great about these themes is that the content all rolls over. So really quickly, we've created a page. We've done some things here. But if I switch back over to the 2013 theme, all that content is still there. Okay.
Wow.
services and all that. So if you put in a lot of effort on your last WordPress assignment, all the content's still there when you switch themes. You might just do some minor layout things here and there, but you should mostly be set. Okay, and so keep in mind, this is going to have an odd due date because of when our final exam is. This is going to be due just before the final exam, because the idea is I want to have this graded and done with before you take your exam. Okay? Because then it gets confusing, because I've had this happen in the past where I'm trying to grade your exam and your assignment at the same time, and it's like I have to log into your WordPress account and flip over themes, and sometimes people aren't clear on their theme names, and it becomes difficult to tell which theme is their final and which is their assignment. And so what I'm going to do is it's due the day before your exam. You're going to have it all graded before your exam, and then that way when you go into your exam, that's the last thing you have to do. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes left. I think we're pretty much done. There's no other questions on the exam format or anything. You've already taken the midterm, so you should be pretty good on that. Next week we'll do a review. We'll go through this process one more time so you get some more practice. Okay, so let me do this. I want to reserve the last 15 minutes for anybody who had upload errors or any sort of other issues. So for those of you who uploaded and you're fine, I'll see you next week. For anybody else, just stick around and I'll help you.